Alright, in this lesson we are going to continue to solve equations, except this time we're going to add in some fractions. Hooray, your favorite. Actually, because so many students tend to struggle with fractions, or because they get so complex, we're going to learn a method called fraction busters. So let's review a couple things first. First of all, when you have a mixed number like 4 2/3, you can write that as an improper fraction. Remember, you do that by multiplying the denominator times the whole number, and then adding the top or the numerator. So 4 times 3 is 12, plus 2 is 14. And then you just write that over the denominator. Also remember that when you have two fractions, like 2/5, and you multiply it by another fraction, like 1/3, to figure out the answer, you just multiply straight across. 2 times 1 is 2, and straight across 5 times 3 is 15. Okay, also remember that if you're multiplying a fraction by a whole number, like 2/3 times 3, you can write the whole number as a fraction by writing it over 1. And then you just do what I just showed you in the last example and multiply straight across. 2 times 3 is 6, and 3 times 1 is 3. And notice that this fraction can be reduced because 6 divided by 3 is 2. Okay, same with the second example here, 2/5 times 5. You write the 5 as a fraction by writing it over 1. Multiply straight across. 2 times 5 is 10, and 5 times 1 is 5. This also can be reduced. 10 divided by 5 is 2. Now there is a technique that you may have learned in the past, and it will be helpful today when you're learning how to use fraction busters. And that is to notice that anytime you have the same number in the numerator on the top that you have in the denominator on the bottom, or if they're multiples of each other, they can cancel each other out. Like this 3 here, because it's on the top, cancels this 3 here because it's on the bottom, and what's left is 2 over 1. 2 over 1 is just the same as 2. Same answer. Same thing is true in this second example. This 5 on the top and this 5 on the bottom, because they're the same and one's on the top and one's on the bottom, they cancel. What's left is 2 over 1. 2 over 1 is the same as 2. So, if you have an equation like this that has fractions in it, 1/3 x times 2/3, you can solve that using methods that you've already learned. But what I want to show you today is a way to get rid of all of the fractions and only work with whole numbers. And the way that you do that is you look at all of the denominators, the numbers on the bottom, and you find a common denominator. So in this case, both of them are 3. So my common denominator is 3. Now I'm going to take that common denominator and multiply the whole thing, both sides, by 3. This side by 3, and this side by 3. And when you do that, on the left-hand side, write that as a fraction over 1, and you notice the top 3 is the same as the bottom 3, so they cancel each other. And what's left is 1 over 1, or just 1x. On the right-hand side, same thing. Write this as a fraction. This 3 and this 3, they cancel, and what's left is 2 over 1, or just 2. So 1x equals 2, or just x equals 2 is the answer. Okay, that one worked well because both the denominators were 3. Sometimes you'll have problems where the denominators won't be the same, like this one, 3/4 r equals 1/8. But you do the same thing. You look at both of the denominators and find a common denominator. In this case, the common denominator between 4 and 8 is 8. So I'm going to multiply the whole thing, both sides, by 8. Now I'm going to start on the right-hand side first because it's easiest. I'm going to write that over 1, and notice that 8 cancels with 8, and you're left with 1 over 1, or 1. Now, if you know how to do canceling and you can cancel the 8 and the 4, that's fantastic. I'm going to just stick with multiplying so that I don't confuse anyone. I'm going to write this 8 over 1, and then I'm going to multiply. 8 times 3 is 24, and 1 times 4 is 4. Now, you might be thinking, well, wait, you said you were going to get rid of all the fractions. Well, I'm not there yet, but I will in just 1 second. Notice that 24 divided by 4, when I divide those, I get 6. So now I have an equation that has just whole numbers. So I took this complicated fraction equation and have rewritten it like this. And I can finish by dividing both sides by 6 to get r equals 1/6. Alright, so that's the basic premise for how you will solve equations with fractions. Let's look at an equation that's a little more complicated, like this one. Now, if I tried to solve this equation the way we've done it in the past, this is going to get really ugly because adding and subtracting 3/5 and 1/3, that just seems too complicated. So instead what I'm going to do is look at every single term in this equation, this one, and this one, and find a common denominator. And in this case, the common denominator is 15. That's the number that 5, 5, and 3 will all divide into evenly. So I'm going to multiply everything on the right hand side and everything on the left hand side by 15. So when I multiply a fraction times a whole number, I write it over 1. On the right hand side, if I multiply 15 times 1/3, I get 15 times 1 is 15, 1 times 3 is 3. On the left hand side, I'm going to have to distribute this to both terms, but I'll do that one at a time. 15 times 2/5, 15 times 2 is 30, and 1 times 5 is 5, and that's my x term. Plus, then I distribute the 15 to the 3/5. 15 times 3 is 45, and 1 times 5 is 5. Now, this is where people tend to freak out. Don't freak out. This first step makes the equation look more complicated, but what you notice after that is each of these fractions can be reduced into a whole number. 15 over 3, 15 divided by 3 is 5. And then over here on the left hand side, 30 divided by 5 is 6. And 45 divided by 5 is 9. So this equation in green is a lot easier to solve than this original equation. So you can finish that like you've learned to finish a two-step equation by first subtracting 9. You get 6x equals -4, and then divide both sides by 6. You get x equals -4 over 6, which can be reduced to -2/3. Divide both the top and the bottom by 2. Okay. Here's another example. Now in this problem, there are fractions, but notice that only 2 of them have a denominator. This middle term is a whole number, but you can still write it over 1 and make it into a fraction. And looking at all of these denominators, the common denominator between 3, 1, and 7, common denominator is 21. So I'm going to multiply this side by 21 and all of this side by 21. Okay, 21 times 5 is 105. Oops, first write them over 1. And then 7 times 1 is 7. Now, I can do the multiplication in my head. If you need to use a calculator to do the multiplication, that's perfectly fine. But remember, we're working with fractions. Don't start dividing these numbers and getting decimals. That will defeat the whole purpose. On the other side, 21 times 2 is 42. 1 times 3 is 3, so it's 42 over 3x. And then it's minus 21 times 2 is 42 over 1. Okay, again, looks more complicated, but when you divide out each of these fractions, you find that each of these will be a whole number. 42 divided by 3 is 14. 42 over 1 is just 42. And 105 divided by 7 is 15. And then from there, you can just finish the equation like a two-step equation. But to save time, I'm going to stop the video here because the purpose of this was to show you how to bust those fractions. So, good luck on the assignment.